We can trust the official reports. We can trust the 9/11 Commission. Really? The 9/11 Commission was run by Philip Zelikow. Zelikow had co-authored a book with Condoleezza Rice. They had worked together in the first Bush Security Council. She's the one. She brought him in to write National Security Strategy of the United States 2002, which gave the United States a new doctrine of preemptive warfare that says we can, because of 9/11, we can attack any country that we think might pose a threat to us in the future. No longer obeying international law, there has to be an imminent threat. That's Philip Zelikow, who ran the 9/11 Commission and wrote the final report, excluding lots of things that the commissioners assumed would be in there. We can trust NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which has put out the official report on the Twin Towers. Still, by the way, over 6 years after 9/11, has not put out a report on Building 7. Why did Building 7 collapse, which was not hit by a plane? They keep saying, oh, we need more time, we need more time. It looks like they're going to say, we need until the Bush-Cheney administration is out of office. But anyway, the NIST is not an independent agency. It's an agency of the Commerce Department. Therefore, it's part of the Bush administration. The Bush administration, which 11,000 scientists now have signed a statement, including over 50 Nobel scientists, saying the Bush administration has been involved in the distortion of scientific knowledge for partisan political ends. Do you think NIST would not have distorted the facts in order to protect the Bush administration on this? Even left-wing journalists like Alexander Cockburn, George Monbiot will say, oh, everybody who believes this alternative conspiracy theory is a nut. Let's look at some of the nuts who are involved in the 9/11 truth movement. Colonel Robert Bowman, who was an interceptor pilot, has a PhD in engineering, and was in charge of the Star Wars program during the Carter administration, and Ford and Carter administrations. Andreas von Bülow, who was high up in the German defense establishment. Leonid Ivashov, who is the former chief of staff of the Russian armed forces. Cockburn says these are people who belong to the movement who know nothing about military history. Then we have these various organizations, Scholars for 9/11 Truth, where you've got hundreds of people with PhDs in various fields. And then Veterans for 9/11 Truth. So you have a growing number of former military officers who support the 9/11 Truth movement, who are members of the 9/11 Truth movement. And then a new organization, Pilots for 9/11 Truth, people who say, from our knowledge of flying airplanes, the official story about the hijacking and flying into the buildings and flying into the Pentagon simply cannot be true. New pilots are joining every week. I get a notice of more people. And most recently now, people used to say, well, you don't have architects and engineers. Now we have almost 200 architects and engineers who just in the last few weeks have joined this organization. You can go on Google, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and you'll find it's organized by Richard Gage, a very sophisticated architect in the Bay Area. We have former CIA analysts, Ray McGovern, Bill Christensen. Bill Christensen wrote a note to his friends kind of explaining why he wrote an article called Don't Ridicule the 9/11 Truth Movement, because he said, I refused to look at the evidence for over 5 years. When I finally did, it was very painful. I had to conclude 9/11 was pulled off by forces within my own government. He was a very high-up CIA analyst, a senior analyst. And most recently, Robert Baer, if you saw the movie Syriana, he's the one who wrote the book that was based on. In fact, the George Clooney character was somewhat based on Robert Baer. So more people are coming out, very sophisticated people who do know about these things, who do know how to evaluate empirical evidence. Now let's just look at a little of the evidence very quickly. What about Osama bin Laden? Isn't it clear that he was responsible for 9/11? If you go on the FBI website, Most Wanted Terrorists, and look under Usama, it's spelled with a U, Osama bin Laden, you'll find he's wanted for various embassy bombings. He is not wanted for 9/11. So a fellow has a muckraker report, called up Rex Toom, chief of publicity for the FBI, and says, why is he not wanted for, why is he not indicted for 9/11? Rex Toom says, because we have no hard evidence that Osama bin Laden was responsible for 9/11. Okay, why weren't the planes intercepted? We've now been given 3 different stories. Generally, if somebody is accused of a crime and he keeps changing his story, you start to get suspicious. Why aren't we suspicious about the changing stories? And particularly when the last story, the one by the 9/11 Commission, contradicts what several of our leading generals who were involved that day say about, and particularly about Flight 93. What about the collapses of the 3 buildings? If we want to go with a priori beliefs, no high-rise steel frame building in the history of our universe has ever collapsed, total straight-down collapse, except through the use of explosives. If you want to go with a priori beliefs, then you would say the a priori assumption would be these buildings were brought down by explosions. And then if you get empirical, you find that with the Twin Towers, over 150 people have testified that they heard explosions during and before the collapses. 118 of those belong to the fire department. They did oral histories of that day, thankfully, that were corrected. Many of the people giving that testimony are journalists. If you go on Google and look up the ultimate con, it's a little, I think, 10, 12-minute video. You'll see rapid fire, all sorts of reporters and fire people and policemen reporting on explosions. These are never played anymore, but on 9/11 itself, there was lots of evidence for explosions from journalists. We've got reports from Wall Street Journal, journalists, hardly a left-wing rag. Molten metal. Lots of people have testified, many scientists, many people involved in the cleanup. There was molten, they would say molten steel, it might have been molten iron, because if you use thermate, the steel turns to iron as a byproduct. But it stayed hot, it stayed molten for weeks afterwards. So there was some tremendous source of energy. I mean, fire doesn't come anywhere close to the temperature needed to melt steel. And NIST admits that. No fire melted any steel. And yet, it looks like a lot of steel was melted. How did this happen? NIST just denies that there was any molten metal in spite of all the... Let me end with one final example, the attack on the Pentagon. This plane, according to the official trajectory, came in, could have crashed straight into the roof of the Pentagon, could have crashed right into where Rumsfeld and all the chop brass were. Some reason chose to do a very fancy downward spiral and come in to hit wedge 1, came in and hit it almost at ground level. This was some amazing pilot. This is a Boeing 757. People who saw the trajectory said, must be a military plane. This is a very sophisticated maneuver. This was Hani Hanjour, who was such a poor pilot. This is all over. It's in the New York Times. Everyone had reported. This is a horrible pilot who was so bad in a single engine plane, instructors would not go up with him a second time. No one would rent him a plane. He couldn't fly a Cessna, and yet he's supposed to have flown this huge bird at a rapid speed, amazing downward spiral.